who will give a talk about the use of interactive tools in plant disease pathology. Mladen is a postdoctoral researcher by Penn State University, specialized on the fields of plant epidemiology and plant pathology. So once again, thanks for coming, and the floor is yours, Mladen.
Hello, I believe you can see me. And now you should be seeing my screen. Okay. I won't say a lot about myself at the very beginning because kind of presentation is made that way. My presentation will be completely different from what you've seen so far. There's no fancy R coding or shinies. It's just about the potential and or the lack thereof of use of these advanced computational tools in my side of plant pathology. So I kind of changed a little bit of title because I've realized that there's a lot of use of R and Shiny in bioinformatics. So anything kind of not visible to our eyes, anything that is kind of bigger, diseases in field, the use of these tools is on much lower level. So I'll just start with saying this presentation is by me and also my principal investigator, my boss, Paul Esker. We kind of deal with the same problems. So I am from Bosnia Herzegovina. This is my hometown. This is my personal webpage. If somebody wants to go on and take a look at it. I will say a few things about the uses of R and Shiny in plant pathology. As I said, non-molecular segment of it and current works of my group and future plans. So my first contact with I finished electrotechnical high school and I've done bachelor's in crop protection, which is kind of like plant pathology, but overarching part of agriculture, protecting the plants of all possible stressors. And I've kind of created a first crop disease wiki page, not functioning anymore, but I always like to connect these IT tools and agronomy. And what I actually do, this is actually part of more of controlling the pests, the insects who attack our crops. But I mostly do things like this: monitor the spores, see when they're going to infect. And my first work experience was putting this information together from the field, weather information, creating some kind of computer models, and distributing those through different media. I worked on that in NIBIO, that's Norwegian Institute of Plant Protection, and at their decision support system group. And this is how that usually looks like. You have a bunch of weather station, which will show you the risk for different crops, for different diseases. This is how it normally looks like. So then I moved to Ireland, where I've done my PhD. This is kind of where I was able to put all of these things together that I learned and that I still wanted to learn. This is where I started coding in R. I started coding properly in any kind of language, as I realized that I would need that to kind of work in this epidemiology segment of things. So my typical questions are that I get from producers, and my typical questions that I try to answer in my research and I should say probably my research is very applied, not really on that basic science level. So it's kind of, do producers would ask, do I need to spray? When do I need to spray? What do I use to spray based on the level of the risk, or type of the risk, or kind of variety they have. And then between seasons, when planning to kind of going into new season, if you have seasonal crops, is a kind of, what type of potato do I want to, what variety of potato or corn do I want to plant in the type of the soil that I have, and how will that impact my expenditure in terms of crop protection products and so on. So it's kind of a very complex science, very complex. If considered from applied perspective, so you really have to think about a lot of things from the this is actually about a lot of these concepts are borrowed from from human epidemiology, but it's really very similar to what we are doing. We have to think about managing plant disease epidemics, but we have to think about human psychology. All of the stakeholders have their own way of doing things. Then agronomy, economy. Do I need to spray, and how much would that cost me? Statistics. Environment, obviously, very almost a driving factor of all of the things, and then also genetics of our plant pathogens. As you might have seen recently, COVID, we've learned what does it mean to know different strains, and so we deal with very similar things. But our main focus is on environment. It is a driving factor, and then as much as we can do with the host and pathogen, at least on the wider spatial scales. So briefly, my PhD, I'm not going to go through this, but this is how most of the work that I do goes. We do a lot of data, kind of different models, data analysis. Then I've implemented a few of these models, and then tested them in field, see how they work with different varieties under different in different seasons, and then also monitor the plant pathogen population. This is actually a very nice package by Z and Canvar. It's called PopR. So as I said, there's a lot of options, a lot of developments for anything that is smaller than this. As soon as you go into molecular side of things, there's a lot of work. But in terms of anything before this, there's very little work. So this is where I first wanted to use Shiny, actually, but I was told no by my boss because this was still all in the kind of development stages, and we were not allowed to put this into kind of public use. And at that time, I wasn't sure if I could do that, some kind of user profiles and so on. So this was distributed by email, on daily basis, run on my server. Just 3 different models and the weather conditions and the kind of risk estimates. And this is how the final product looks like now. It's running on Irish Meteorological Office portal. You have these animations for 0 to, I think, 5 days in advance lead time, and you can see how Shiny could be used here. So moving forward, also all of my research is available, completely reproducible, and there are these websites. So I do use this to teach as well, and kind of teach what you research approach. Now, Postdoc here at PSU is kind of expanding the toolbox, going more, including more of these tools. We always collect this data, but it's not really used in its full capacity. So I'm also started developing here apps for interactive apps for education, and kind of going towards building these R-based research and learning ecosystem where we can collect the data and use it instantly for decision support, but also creating a database that is then used for research and for teaching new students. And so, as you've seen in prior works, basically this is our process. We collect a bunch of data, put it in some database, do some modeling, which will help us work in season and between season. But kind of with this new project that I started a few months back, I wanted to put this data to use straight away. We collect the data, but make it available as we collect it. Usually, that's not how these things work. So this would help sustainability and kind of capacity building. This is not really a standard practice, but it could become very easily, because all of this that I've done is costed me literally nothing. There's no I didn't pay any fee. I just used all of the free resources that I have. And we have the problem that with lack of digitization in data collection in agriculture. So I started doing this, and I've started thinking, okay, there are some of these free commercial apps that we can perhaps utilize to collect our data. But I've realized that there's a lot of them, but they're so lacking in customization, and none of them would actually do the job for us, and we would have to pay enormous fees for, as this is a project between 8 states, where a lot of people will be collecting data in different kind of surroundings. Some of them need a GSM. A lot of these fields, as you see, are very distant areas, and some of them need want to have a GSM. And a lot of these apps are created for people who have constant GSM access. So I kind of started thinking, can we do this differently? So this is what normally people still do because of these problems. They would go into the field, fill out the form like this, see what they see in the field, and then go into the office and fill those into some forms, usually Excel forms, which are normally let's just say that they get lost or computers get broken, and there's always a lot of problems. So I found this tool to be very helpful. AppyCollect is a free open platform for this kind of data collection that is you can use it offline completely when you're off the grid, and I found it very useful for this project. So I utilized that. And also use Google Documents to create a big database for all of the possible pathogens, diseases, but also insects, pests, and any kind of problems that could happen with crops. Made a Google sheet and interactively making website out of that using R Markdown. Why that? It is maybe a little bit of an overkill, but these things often change. We find new problems in field, new problems arise. They change in time, but also in space. Some of them are always coming from down south, moving around. So we need to have this kind of interactive way of changing things, adding new things as we go along. And we have a lot of people involved in this project, so some of them might not agree with what we kind of summarized here. So we leave that very open for commenting and changing and instantly changing the content of the website. Right. So finally coming to some kind of shiny segment, even though I'm only thinking now how to implement it, but the idea is, as you've seen, we're collecting the data in several states, but I'm here concentrating on Pennsylvania, where I'm in the process of making this kind of shiny will probably use kind of a dashboard where I will have different dates, and this will be for soybean, but we're planning to expand this kind of effort on different crops, so corn, soybean, corn, wheat, and different kind of field crops, where there's a lot of these scouting efforts, but these channels are lacking for the data assimilation. And so obviously this is an idea that many of you have seen over the recent times, the COVID-19 trackers and use of Shiny dashboards and I'm losing Plotly, so I intend to use Plotly as well for this one. Also, where I utilize Shiny a lot is development of the teaching materials, and also developing another package where students will be able to use a lot of the functions that are implemented as these functions as the interactive tools. I wanted to show that in action. So basically none of the biology and agriculture students went into agronomy or biology to actually study stats or any kind of mathematical segment of it. And as soon as I showed them this kind of, probably a lot of you have seen exponential growth models, they just don't feel well instantly. So it makes it much easier for us to kind of show them what does it change when we change these rates of progress, how does it influence different models, and when we actually do the simulations, how do we actually learn from this interactively, rather than for them just visualizing things or running the code. This kind of show to have some effect. So this is kind of an example of it. Yeah, one of the problems that I've seen is we often, for our projects, we often don't have enough money to produce something like this. You need to refresh. We often have to have partners as a meteorological office. We have to have a bunch of computer people who will actually help us implement the full website, the data pipeline, and all of this stuff. This is where Shiny becomes very useful, where we actually have, these days, there's free available APIs where we can get the data, the weather data, and run these apps instantly online without to produce something like this 5-10 years ago. You would have to have a project which is like $500,000 to feed all of the mouths that are in that kind of research project. These days the weather data is freely available. We can actually run this. This is actually running for free. This is from Kai Kalvesh. So it's a very nice example of how Shiny is and R in general, and where we're going with this, and how I think it will become a big thing over the next few years in my side of plant pathology. So with that, I would like to finish and see if there are any questions.
Okay, I was reading some questions. So, yeah, the first one I think is a nice question for start. Is why did you choose R? What makes you? Because you told that you started programming and working into these fields at some point in your career? Why did you choose R and not another language?
Yeah. I'm just trying. I've seen a question if I can share slides, so I'm just going to paste this. Paste the link. Where can I paste this? I don't have the option to paste this privately. This is comments. I'm just going to send this to organizer. Can you paste this somewhere? So I've sent it in private chat. Why did I choose R? That's a good question. Python was another option that I had in mind back then. It was mostly a flip of the coin. Maybe a little bit more was because R is more of a statistical programming language than Python. Doesn't really, but I guess there's more statistical packages and more. I liked that at that time. I think I was drawn by the whole tidyverse. It made things look nice. So at that time, when I was starting, I think the R for data science started coming up. I think it was already published back then, or it started. Yeah, so that kind of helped me flip the coin towards the R rather than Python.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think this answers also a similar question. I have a question for you. So you have shown some screenshots of some apps. Can you describe which type of users are the final users of these apps? Are for the moment other researchers, or which type of users?
For the data collection, or for the
For
one that I
example,
was.
this one called BS Plant, the last one you showed.
That one, yeah. That app was just developed as a showcase. They want to, as far as I know, just developed as a showcase for researchers. But I think it's also actually used in as a decision support tool. But I do know that they want to do some more work. That the weather data that they have there is limited. As you've seen, it's only a few locations from the free weather data sources. So if you can add more weather data to create a denser grid, you obviously get a better spatial coverage and better information. But there's different apps like. So that one was a free example. Usually we create, as I said, we have partners from Met Office, from some kind of computational segment, either at universities or institutes, or you have a bunch of people who are actually employed, and then you have researchers who are actually working in field, and now those projects quickly grow very, very high in money, and they last for 3 years, and then they usually just die off as people move to new things. This makes things much easier, developing people who have actually these skills to be able to understand all segments, and I can do that now for much, much less money than. So that's the power of these open tools, open source science, available data, are and shine in this case.
So next question, someone asked is if for plant pathology there's any kind of ontology.
I'm not sure I understand.
Like for example, on genetics, you have this geo ontology, like some codes that define some biological process or some molecular functions. And do you have like some database or standard that you define types of pathology, pathogens, this type of stuff?
Yes, if you're talking about the biological classification of the pathogens, yes, we're talking probably about the same things. I'm not sure where you're going with the question. What's the idea?
No, I think that someone from the audience asked, but I think that because this exists on bioinformatics, on many fields, on genetics, for example. I think someone was curious just about whether this has been developed, but maybe also I think it exists for general pathology for humans. It also there's a classification from World Health Organization, and maybe
Uh,
this, yeah,
well, pathogens are pathogens. We don't have specific pathogens. They are same as the ones that you would study in the bioinformatics. Yeah, of course, there's a classification. There's ontology in that sense, but uh, I'm not sure how it actually goes. So when it comes to a very practical, we're very interested in just these bigger, very dominant. Species level, and then subspecies, some kind of subspecies level. Again, I'll go back to the COVID-19 example. You have one pathogen which has then, let's call it, some kind of level of subspecies that when it becomes big enough, just like we've seen with Omicron, there's a lot of variants of COVID-19, but we were interested in those who have managed to establish themselves as almost as a level of species that have their own kind of pathogenicity and different kind of virulence. So that's where we kind of, in a very applied sense, that's where we become interested in, say we have a specific disease, the one potato late blight, which is very interesting, very important disease, but we're interested in those big established variants that become a genotype that are concerned of. There's always millions of them that are genotyped. We know that they exist, but until they become dominant and kind of create a specific type of problem, overcome some genes, resistance genes, and so on, that's where we become concerned about.
yeah, and maybe this will be the last question. So you have really described a lot of challenges into creating shiny apps and in general working with your field. One thing was the data. That data acquisition of data, it's difficult. Sometimes you need it's private data or commercial data. Do you think that Shiny can help in creating a community? Like for example, in bioinformatics and genetics, you have a lot of open data, and therefore it's more easier to share. Do you think Shiny can be a good start of a community in the field of plant pathology? Strength this
Um,
community.
it's a good question. It's a good question. That is a problem. As I said, I kind of differentiated from the molecular side of things because, as you said, there's a lot of work there. People are communicating very well. And they found a way over there. There are also data privacy issues there, but people have found a way to overcome those and work together. I feel that this is still not at that same level of quality and communication levels in kind of uh, more applied field kind of science, bigger than molecules, the things that we can see actually. Um, could Shiny help? Yeah, anything that kind of enables us to do things faster, cheaper, not to be dependent on, as I said, getting big money for companies to create these apps, these data pipelines where we can actually. I didn't code before 2016, and I'm not really that smart. It's just like start using it, and I see a lot of kids coming up these days that they started. Some of them just use R just to get things done, but some of them do quite like it, find it cool, and uh, add that big valuable skill besides the molecular lab, besides the field skills, which is kind of and I kind of like that. So definitely sources like resources like Shiny, then where you can actually put those into practical use, where people could actually see things, and is definitely useful. And as you say, data privacy, I'm also The reason why I'm not showing some of the things with the dashboards is that we're still clearing things, how to actually develop this, working through data privacy, because we are collecting all of this data from private farmers or research plots, and how do you have to be very cautious about these things. Yeah.
All right, so I think that's the last question. So thank you again for coming. If you have more questions, you can contact Mladen through the conference or privately.
Thank you for
And
having me. Thank you for the chance for to present here and to actually take part. This is very, very inspiring and interesting, and brings a lot of new ideas for me.